April 1945. Southern Germany, late evening. General Patton was returning to headquarters after checking frontline positions. On the way back, his convoy passed a field hospital that had been set up inside a former German school building. Night was beginning to settle in. The sun had gone down around 20 minutes earlier. As Patton's driver prepared to continue past the hospital, Patton spotted something outside near the entrance. He immediately ordered the driver to stop. Patton stepped out of the jeep and moved in for a closer look. Several men were lying outside the hospital building. They were not standing or resting on benches, they were stretched out on blankets placed directly on the cold dirt during the chilly April evening. Patton walked toward them. He counted 14 men, all wearing American uniforms, all wounded. Bandages covered their arms, legs, and heads, with blood soaking through the gauze in several places. All 14 of them were black soldiers. Patton turned his attention toward the hospital. Inside the building, lights were glowing through the windows. He could see rows of occupied beds and medical workers moving from patient to patient. White soldiers were inside receiving treatment-warm beds, medicine, care, while black soldiers remained outside in the cold, left on the dirt with nothing. Patton knelt beside one of the wounded men, a corporal whose leg was wrapped in thick bandages. "Why are you out here, soldier?" The corporal looked up and noticed the 4 stars on Patton's helmet. His expression immediately changed. "Sir, they told us the hospital is full, sir." Patton glanced back at the building, then looked again at the corporal. "Full of what?" The corporal paused for a moment. "Patients, sir." "White patients?" The corporal said nothing. He did not need to answer. Patton rose to his feet and looked across the other 13 men lying on the ground, wounded American soldiers who had fought in the same war, shed the same blood, yet were forced to stay outside a hospital with empty beds inside because of their skin color. Patton turned sharply toward his driver. "Bring the hospital commander out here. Now." The driver rushed into the building while Patton remained outside beside the 14 wounded men, waiting with them in the cold. A confrontation was about to begin. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We share stories from World War II where, at times, the hardest fight was not against the enemy. It was against the very people who were meant to stand beside you. The hospital commander was a major named William Hutchins. He had served in the Army Medical Corps for 12 years. Hutchins stepped outside and immediately saw Patton standing near the 14 black soldiers lying on the ground. He gave a salute. Patton did not salute back. Instead, he pointed directly at the wounded men. "Major, why are these wounded soldiers outside your hospital?" Hutchins glanced at the men before turning back to Patton. "Sir, the hospital is full. We don't have any beds available." Patton looked toward the building behind Hutchins. "How many beds does this hospital have, Major?" 40, sir. "And how many of them are occupied?" Hutchins paused briefly. 38, sir." Patton let the silence hang in the air for a moment. "You have 2 empty beds while 14 wounded men are lying outside in the dirt. Major, that is not a capacity issue. That is a decision." Hutchins began trying to explain himself. Patton cut him off before he could continue. "Don't explain, Major. Just answer the question. Are these men outside because they're black?" Hutchins lowered his eyes toward the ground. "Sir, we have a policy regarding integrated wards." "A policy?" Patton stepped closer to Hutchins. "Major, I do not care about your policy. I care about wounded American soldiers receiving proper treatment, and right now I'm looking at 14 Americans who are not getting it." He turned toward the hospital for a moment, then faced Hutchins again. "Here's what's going to happen. You are going to bring every one of these 14 men inside immediately. You are going to give them beds, medical care, and everything else the white soldiers inside are receiving." Hutchins quickly objected. "Sir, some of the other patients will not accept sharing a ward with colored soldiers." Patton's voice became lower and colder. "Major, I don't care what the other patients are willing to accept. This is a United States Army hospital, not a country club. These men fought for their country. They shed blood for their country, and they are going to receive treatment in their country's hospital." He stopped for a brief moment before continuing. "And if any patient has a problem with that, you tell them they can speak to me directly." Hutchins looked over at the 14 wounded soldiers and then back at Patton. "Sir, even with the 2 empty beds, we still don't have enough room for all of them." Patton answered immediately. "Then make room. Release anyone who is healthy enough to leave. Put 2 men in 1 bed if necessary. I don't care how you handle it, but these 14 men will be inside, warm and receiving treatment within the next 10 minutes. He raised his wrist and checked his watch. It's 7:30. At 7:40 I'm walking back into that building, and if I find even one of these men still lying on the ground, you'll be removed from command and reassigned to digging latrines. Do you understand, Major? Hutchins looked directly at Patton. Yes, sir. Then move. Hutchins immediately turned around and hurried back into the hospital. Patton looked down at the 14 wounded men. You're going inside. You're getting proper treatment, and if anyone gives you trouble, you tell them General Patton gave the order. One of the soldiers, a private with heavy bandages around his head, finally spoke. Sir, we don't want to make trouble. Patton looked back at him. Son, the only trouble here is that you're outside when you should be inside receiving medical care. He leaned down closer to the private. You fought for this country. You were wounded for this country. You have every right to be treated with respect in your country's hospital. Within 5 minutes, medical personnel began coming outside carrying stretchers. The 14 wounded soldiers were carefully lifted onto stretchers and carried inside the hospital. Patton stood there watching each man enter the building. After the final soldier was brought in, Patton walked inside himself. The hospital was in complete disorder. Beds were being moved around quickly. White patients who were able to walk were being discharged, while others were asked to share beds. At the same time, the 14 black soldiers were finally being given beds, blankets, and medical care. Some of the white patients were clearly upset by the change. One of them, a sergeant with his arm in a sling, walked over to Major Hutchins. Sir, I don't want to stay in the same room as them. Hutchins began to answer, but Patton stepped forward first. Sergeant, you have 2 choices. You can remain in this hospital and accept that your fellow soldiers are being treated here, or you can leave. The sergeant looked nervously at the 4 stars on Patton's helmet. Sir, I was just... You were just... What? Patton interrupted. Going to complain because wounded American soldiers are receiving treatment? The sergeant lowered his eyes. No, sir. Good. Then return to your bed and let these men rest. The sergeant quietly walked away. Patton remained at the hospital for another 30 minutes, personally making sure all 14 men were settled, comfortable, and receiving proper treatment before finally preparing to leave. Before he left, he pulled Major Hutchins aside. Major, this never happens again. Every wounded American soldier gets treatment. I don't care what color they are. Do you understand? Yes, sir. If I hear about one more wounded soldier being denied care at this hospital because of the color of his skin, you will face a court-martial for dereliction of duty. Hutchins gave a quick nod. Yes, sir. Patton took one final look around the hospital. The 14 black soldiers were finally inside, resting in beds and receiving treatment. Satisfied, he turned and left. News of what Patton had done that night spread across the Third Army within a matter of days. Hospitals throughout the Third Army's area quickly understood the message. Wounded black soldiers began receiving treatment without being turned away. The situation was not suddenly perfect. There were still tensions and resistance in many places. But the incident marked a beginning. One of the 14 soldiers Patton discovered outside the hospital was a private named Samuel Williams from Georgia. He had been wounded in the shoulder during a firefight 2 days earlier. Williams recovered from his injuries and returned home after the war. In 1982, he gave an interview to a local newspaper about his experiences during the war. When he was asked what memories stayed with him the most, he answered, I remember lying on the ground outside that hospital in the cold, thinking that after everything we had done, we still were not good enough to be inside. Then a 4-star general stopped his jeep, stepped out, and stood beside us in the dirt until they finally let us in. That was the day I realized some people in power actually care. Williams died in 1995 at the age of 72. After his death, his family donated his uniform and medals to a local museum. The museum later created a display honoring his wartime service, and part of that exhibit tells the story of the night he lay outside a hospital, while a general stopped to help. Today, visitors to that museum in Georgia can still read Williams' own words, describing the moment someone with authority chose to do what was right. The hospital in Germany no longer stands. After the war, the school building was returned to the German people, but the story survived. 14 wounded black soldiers lying outside in the dirt while empty beds waited inside and one general who made sure they were treated as they deserved. What would you have done if you had been Major Hutchins that night? Would you have followed the policy, or followed the general? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories about moments when people decided doing the right thing mattered more than blindly following rules, make sure you subscribe.